Sorry about that. We didn't, I violated my own rule by not muting. You ready for us?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, all right. Factually, just one quick question before we get started. What will your age be next May 1st of this year? Just same question. We all
54.
54. Can you take notes of this? Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've done this with us before. Could you briefly begin by describing the contours of your district, the boundaries of your district, tell us your name, your party affiliation, and then just give us a brief bio where you grew up, your professional history and so forth. And we'll go from there with some questions.
Sounds good. So my name is Andrea Salinas. I am running for the 6th Congressional District of Oregon. I'm the current representative in this district, and the contours of the district, it's a brand new district, the 6th Congressional. It sits at the heart of the Willamette Valley. It starts in East Washington County, so southwest Portland suburbs, a small portion of Clackamas County. It goes into all of Yamhill and Polk County, and then portions of Marion County, but Salem is our largest city, and we do cover all of, and most of Marion County is west of I-5, but we do cover all of Woodburn and Jervis as well. And then we are home to the Grand Ronde community. My background, I grew up in the Bay Area of California. I am a daughter of a Mexican immigrant, very middle-class family. My dad and mom taught me the value of hard work. My dad came over as a child from Mexico, worked in the fields, earned his citizenship by going to Vietnam, coming back and getting a good paying union job. And that is kind of the model that I saw, is that you could, if the rules were set up correctly and fairly, then people could get ahead. And I see that people today, especially here in Oregon, don't have a lot of the same opportunities that that my dad did. And I saw it as I grew up, and it really propelled me to go into a line of work of public service. So I have been working for really in legislation and in public service since I graduated from Cal back in 1994. I worked for 3 different members of Congress before moving to Oregon, where I worked for Congresswoman Darlene Hooley, who represented the Willamette Valley at the time in 06 and 08. I went on, after she retired, I went on to work as an advocate for different unions, mostly working on healthcare, a couple of different reproductive healthcare organizations, as well as some environmental groups. And then in 2017, right after President Trump got elected, I realized that, my community could use some more help. And so I decided to lean in a bit more into the work that I was doing, the advocacy work that I was doing. And I decided to run for an appointment process that had opened up in the state legislature. So I represented Lake Oswego and Southwest Portland for about 5 years in the legislature. And then once the new district was drawn in 2021, I realized that a majority of this district comprises the largest Latino population in the state of Oregon in terms of the congressional districts. This is my community. It's a community I've been working with for a number of years on different issues, everything from making sure our farm workers were included in the increase in the minimum wage bill, to making sure that they had healthcare, and listening to Latino businesses, but really recognizing that they probably had a marginalized voice in Congress. And so I wanted to give voice to what I think had historically been a more marginalized voice from this community in Congress.
Great, thank
you.
you. Can you remind us of your committee assignments?
Yeah, I serve currently on the House Agriculture Committee, the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I'm on a group. It's called the Congressional Executive Commission on China, where we have a lot of hearings and we monitor China, but we don't actually put out legislation or pass any legislation.
What is that? Is that a new committee?
It is relatively new. It was actually adopted. It's bicameral and bipartisan, obviously. It was adopted once China became a member of the World Trade Organization, and we gave China permanent normal trade relations. That was part of the package to continue to monitor human rights, environmental, how China functions environmentally across the globe. intellectual property. So kind of continuing to monitor China as a new trading, not so new anymore, but a new trading partner at the time.
So is part of that work evaluating whether the tariffs that President Trump put in place are effective, or is that outside the scope of the committee's work?
That's really the scope of the Ways and Means Committee, which is a committee I would love to serve on at some point. But this really mostly monitors some of the larger geopolitical decisions, some of the journalists that have been detained because of free speech issues in China. So pretty much more of the, I would say, the social issues that go on in China.
Gotcha. So what would you say the most consequential work that you've engaged in, and I mean by that particular piece of legislation that you've been involved in your first term?
Well, I would say probably the one piece of legislation that I was able to get passed has been the most consequential. It was the first bill I introduced, actually. It was a bill to help the Grand Ronde tribe be able to pursue land claim rights. They were left out of the ability to pursue what was rightfully theirs. It's called the Thompson Strip. Several years ago, it was a mistake by the Bureau of Land Management. And so, but we needed some form of legislation to correct this mistake. And they had been working on it for about the last 10 years. I introduced the bill. Like I said, it was the first bill I introduced when I first got here. And I realized very quickly that we are, as a Democrat, I'm in the minority and I needed to seek out help. So I went to my old friend from the legislature, Congressman Cliff Bentz, and I asked him to sign on to the bill. And he really did not like it. He thought it was too overreaching and that it would give Grand Ronde tribe more abilities over land claims. And so that's when the negotiations started. And, I'm pretty tenacious and I know how all this works. And so I knew that, if I was going to get this done, I needed the help, obviously, of my Oregon delegation, but obviously of someone who served on the Committee of Jurisdiction. He serves on House Natural Resources, and that's where the bill was assigned. So I worked with him all throughout the summer, and we started going back and forth on changing the language and getting him to a more comfortable place while also making it an effective piece for the Grand Ronde tribe. We got it passed actually right before Thanksgiving, handed it off to Senator Merkley, where I had been working over there to make sure that he was geared up and ready to take it. And then this president signed it in December. So it was only one of 27 bills that passed both chambers last year. And normally the House Congress passes a couple hundred. So I was pretty proud of that. And it is like the most consequential thing I've done.
So could you tell us a little more specifically exactly what it will do?
Yeah, so Grand Ronde was actually prohibited from seeking land claims that they thought might be rightfully theirs. So in Oregon, and there is a piece of land in Polk County that that had been excluded from their property, and it was a mistake that was made, and they wanted to be able to set claim to it again. And so, but in order to do that, they needed legal and legislative permission. So we needed to codify permission again. And so,
how big a piece of land is it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember. I want to say maybe 200 acres. It's not huge.
This will give them the opportunity to buy it, or do they get it by right now?
I think they get it by right now, but they have to apply for it. I mean, they have to go through the process of going through
Yeah. While we're on the topic, there is a lot of heat around the Coquille tribe's desire to move into a Medford, or to open a casino in Medford. Since you've been active with the Grand Ronde on this issue, have you looked into that Medford proposal? And if so, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about it, and I think it would open up a whole can of worms that I don't think Oregon or the tribes would want to see. And so I think once you start doing that, you're going to have tribes wanting to move into different areas, and the fairness, going back to why I ran for Congress, the fairness and balance of it will be unsettled. So
And you've taken, I presume you've had to take a position on that in writing somewhere. There's a letter
I
with
have.
your.
Yeah.
And has the rest of the delegation agreed with you on that?
That's a good question. I don't know where. I would imagine so, but I can't say for sure.
So I know you worked for Pete Stark and Representative Hooley. Who was the third person you worked for?
The first person actually in DC that I worked for was Senator Harry Reid.
Okay, all right, so those are three great names. How long in total was that staff work that you did?
So I was on the Hill for about 7 years total, and before I moved to Oregon, and then I worked for Hooley for another 2 years, so 9 years total for members of Congress.
So you're much more experienced probably than the average incoming freshman. How do you think that experience helped you in your first term?
I think it's made me really practical, right? I've seen what works and what doesn't work. I think I can understand legislative maneuvering. I understand performance versus kind of real policy. So I think I'm really quick in the uptake and trying to figure out how to maneuver and where to go when I want, a serious policymaker on the other side of the aisle to work with. And I think I've found a few of those people. But yeah, so I think it's just, yeah, I've been able to expedite and be more effective quicker.
So with the retirements of Representative DeFazio and soon Representative Blumenauer, we lose a lot of Oregon loses a lot of seniority in DC. How are you going to react to that or try to overcome that loss of seniority?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. I will say that I have actually, given my desire to learn a bit more and to understand what has been going on, especially in the trade world and tax world, I've actually been talking to Congressman Blumenauer quite a bit to be able to understand how he's been able to navigate trade in, what is a very, liberal district for him, and figure out how we satisfy the needs of manufacturing and bringing manufacturing back here, but also being, we are a trade dependent state. I think we're, 18th largest trade dependent state in the United States. So learning a lot from him before he goes. And I've had actual sit down meetings with him. We've been able to talk on the plane. We've had breakfast together. So that sort of thing. I'm also learning a lot from Congresswoman Bonamici, and we serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee together. But really learning from Earl and from Suzanne, especially like I said before, Earl leaves, has kind of been my immediate way to overcome that. But yeah, there is going to be a huge loss. And then our senators are also very good and reliable sources. Obviously, they haven't been serving in the House, but at least they have one chamber that they've been working from, and obviously needed to work with House partners. So
yeah.
So I do talk to Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden a lot too.
So you've got a pretty diverse set of interests within your district. I mean, most districts do, but I'm curious if you were to identify the single thing that is of most concern, or that people are asking you to get involved in or help them with within the 6th district, what would that be?
I would say there are a couple of things, but my rural areas are really suffering. And by suffering, I mean, in rural areas, Yamhill County, Polk County, but just the smaller cities have a lot of pent up need in terms of infrastructure. And so whether it's deferred maintenance for sewer, clean drinking water, roads, there's a lot of need there. And I like to tell people that, fixing something in, say, Carlton and, the drinking water system or sewage system in Carlton is probably going to cost nearly the same as it would in Portland. However, the ratepayers that they have to spread that over is far fewer, right? So it becomes exponentially more expensive. And I think because you haven't had a history of political leaders who have been in the same positions for a while, and you have city councils and mayors that turn over pretty quickly, you don't have that vision too for a long-term process. So I have seen a lot of need in my rural areas around infrastructure. And so I've actually developed a bill to address this, and it would kind of address it nationwide, but it's called the Rural Partners and Prosperity Act, to help some of our rural towns actually figure out, because at the federal level, there are a lot of grants and loan opportunities that some of our smaller jurisdictions just don't know about, but they don't have the attorneys or the actual expertise. And, a lot of times the mayors are, part-time or volunteer city councils, and say they just don't have the expertise to go and dig and figure out where all these grants are. So getting the federal government, who has lots many more resources than some of our small towns to help them with that technical assistance and to give them the tools to actually figure some of this out is part of my plan around this like Rural Partners and Prosperity Act. I will also say the Farm Bill reauthorization has been a big issue and something that a lot of my constituents have been coming to me for because it is up for reauthorization. We passed a 1-year extension last year, and we are still working to see if we can get something moved this year.
Okay, so, I mean, the perception that I would have from a great distance in a position of ignorance is that there should be a ton of money, at least notionally available because of the large pieces of legislation that Congress did pass, the Federal Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So is it a difficult process to try and get some of that money into the 6th district, or how's that working out?
That I would say that's a little bit different, right? Because what we're talking about in some of those larger bills, and I am really excited for that, and that has been part of some of my objectives and priorities is getting that money into the 6th congressional district. But what we're talking about there are new projects, and mostly around like the Inflation Reduction Act is really geared towards clean energy, and I think Oregon is, kind of punching above its weight. The bipartisan infrastructure law as well. In fact, we were just named a hydrogen hub. So I think we're going to be able to, make some progress around some of the networks that we'll be doing around hydrogen energy and some storage. So I think those are different than what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is mostly through rural development through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so that is different. I will say, anytime you're working with the federal government, though, I do think there are some hoops that you have to go through. But if you are, a big corporation, or if you, or if you're the University of Oregon, you have people who have grants and know how to maneuver and get to those grants or loans that are laid out.
Yeah.
But I will say also part of what I have been asking people is how can we make sure that the rollout, and how can I be communicating to the administration on the rollout of this? What should I be asking? How should we set it up so it is easier, right? Because that's the problem with government a lot of times, is that people recognize it's very hard and difficult, and it should not be this cumbersome and Byzantine.
Yeah. When you ran the first time for this newly created seat, you were living slightly outside the district, and I think you told us then that you planned to move inside the district. Did you in fact move inside the district?
I did, yeah. In fact, it was, I think, the week before Thanksgiving, so right after the election.
Okay, you used to live in Lake Oswego. I'm not asking your address, but do you still live in Lake Oswego, or?
No, I live in Tigard now.
Okay, all right, great. So there was some heat over the past week around the FISA reauthorization bill. Could you tell us, just for our viewers, describe what that bill would do and tell us your thinking and your vote on that bill, please?
Yeah, it would reauthorize our ability around surveillance and intelligence. And really, I mean, I voted for an amendment that would require warrants for access to Americans' privacy and information. And, and I think Oregon, my thinking around this is that, and I've been following Senator Wyden on his work around this for a number of years. Oregonians are very libertarian when it comes to privacy. And I am just as worried as the next person about, terrorist threats, about, domestic terrorist threats. I know, in our district, we, have the Proud Boys and 3%ers and other, cells of organizations that could be harmful. But at the same time, they also have a right to privacy. And so I would want a warrant to show that there is just cause to be looking at people's private data and information. So ultimately, that amendment did not pass, and I did not vote for the underlying bill.
So you're a Democrat, but obviously you serve all of the 6th district, which includes many Republicans and many non-affiliated voters. Can you give us an example of a position that you've taken in the past 2 years where you either voted against the Democratic Party line or displayed some independence from your party?
Yeah, I would say most recently was this past week. I voted for a number of bills that I think my my colleagues probably did not vote the same way around Iran and the various ways that we deal with Iran and the Middle East, and making sure that we put in place the right sanctions, and that we are basically conveying to the front, to both our friends in the Middle East, but also rogue nations, that the United States is serious when it comes to our interests and geopolitics in the region.
So how can you help us understand the difference between your thinking and the sort of party line Democratic thinking on that issue, those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think the party line is that, it's too aggressive, it's too much. We don't need to flex our muscle that much. And I actually disagree. I was in the Middle East. I was in Israel over the summer in August, and there are definitely some reasons that I think the United States needs to show strength now rather than entering any kind of conflict. And I think with some of the resolutions that passed, I think that does show that strength.
Mhm. You mentioned at the outset that you'd work closely with Representative Bentz on the Grand Ron bill. Can you give us another example of, and you've given us another one, I guess, because I'm assuming you voted mostly with Republicans on the Iranian bills. Another instance where you've worked across the aisle to try and get something done?
Yeah, in fact, most of the bills, I mean, all the bills that I've introduced, I try to get a Republican co-sponsor, but I think over half of them I have achieved that. The Rural Partners and Prosperity Act bill, I actually introduced with Congressman Valadao from California. I think he probably has a very similar district to mine. In fact, I think most people who represent rural districts have similar problems where their local jurisdictions are having a hard time finding these grants and accessing them without some kind of like match or things like that. So he's a co-sponsor, and I'm working on that with him, but also Congresswoman Harshbarger from Tennessee. She and I actually, I worked with her to stand up the Rural Healthcare Caucus, and I was one of the founding members. But she and I are on a bill together that addresses mental health for our rural communities, and I call it the fishing, farming, and forestry industries, mostly because we know that these industries have a higher rate of attempted suicide and suicide ideation. And there's larger stigma and a lot of stressors that some other industries don't have. They're constantly underwater, and they carry a lot of debt in their businesses. And so the combination of it being high stigma and low access, there are fewer providers. We decided to put something out that would provide some grants and allow one of the agencies to actually study it a bit more, but also provide grants for telehealth and telemedicine to these rural communities.
One of the issues that has bubbled up in your home state recently is the issue of the governor and the first lady and the first lady's role in the administration. I know you served with Governor Kotek in the legislature for many years. Would it be appropriate for you to include your spouse in meetings regarding legislation or policy?
If he watches this, he will laugh. No, it would not be appropriate.
Okay, so
Not at all.
you haven't done that.
No, no.
What is your reaction to the issue of the governor having done that?
I would say Amy Wilson, she has an area of expertise. She's a social worker. And so I understand perhaps wanting to have conversations. I think my spouse and I have always, from the very beginning, kept very separate lives when it comes to our professional, our professional work. And, and I think we both recognize that transparency and honesty and openness in our work and with, and how we present it provides some integrity to that work. So I think we know how to set boundaries. And I think, I would be he's not involved, and we are very clear about that. But I understand if if Governor Kotek wanted to use her spouse as a subject matter expert, but I would suggest they do that in an extremely transparent manner.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I mean, I'm kind of curious about some of the healthcare issues you were talking. I mean, is there anything, what else are you guys talking about in that some like caucus? Like what are some other solutions that people are mentioning?
Yeah, there are a lot, actually. I mean, I've signed on to, I think, 480 different bills. So I'm either a sponsor of or co-sponsor. I don't lead on 480 bills, but a lot of them are mental health bills. And I just became the co-chair of the Mental Health Care Caucus. It is bipartisan. We need I need to find a Republican to help me chair that, though. But anyway, and I'm co-chairing it with Congressman Don Beyer. Grace Napolitano is leaving. She's been there for 20 years and been the chair. So so there are a number of different things. One of the bills that I have also just introduced is because we're hearing so much about lack of workforce, and that is really a huge barrier to access. And so I introduced a bill that would start to look at peer support specialists in this world, because I do think it would expand access to the mental health spectrum, mental health, substance use disorders, behavioral health problems. But there are barriers to that workforce. A lot of times these folks have criminal records, they're not able to get work. So asking our SAMHSA and addiction recovery so our federal agencies to actually study this a bit more and to figure out what those work barriers are to either certifying or professionalizing this industry, but really to get more of them online in various areas, right? We know that Oregon has a huge mental health crisis, and we're towards the top. I think we're like number 2 or number 3 in terms of need, everywhere from kids to, like I said, people with mental health issues, veterans, people with substance use problems, but we are close to the bottom in terms of being able to serve our communities. So making sure that workforce is expanded is another big issue. I mentioned the telehealth, telemental health issues. I've also put a bill forward. It was one of my first bills. It expands the ability for those who are under Medicare or Medicaid to get 3 free behavioral health visits. And I recognize it's hard when we don't even have the workforce, but a lot of times barrier is cost, or that cost share. So getting people in the door could literally save someone's life. So making sure that that's something that folks know is accessible. And then once you get them in the door, we can figure out, how we expand that. And then something else that has, well, I mean, it's been on my mind since actually the legislature, but actually providing it's all about the payer and the payer systems, but providing some more direct funding for our school-based health centers, as well as our community center behavioral health centers. So these are the centers that are, free of cost to low-income people, but there certainly aren't enough of them. And the payment system really keeps them underwater and not very viable for very long. So we have to fix that and make sure that, again, it's all about access. And I think a lot of times these communities are doing the best they can. We just went out and visited one in both a school-based health center and a community-based health center in McMinnville. But they need to be viable and sustainable.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. We're out of time. We have one question at the end that we always ask people to try and provide a little different insight into each of our candidates. This year's question that we're asking of all candidates is, if a movie were to be made about your life, who would play you?
Oh, that's easy. Eva Longoria.
Okay, well, it's not easy for most people, so you clearly thought about this before.
Yeah, I like it.
That's great. That's great. Representative, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us today.
Thank you all.
All right. Have a
Take
good
care.
week. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.